This is your Morning Boost, recorded in the Forward Ed Network studios. A weekly spark for educators and school leaders ready to lead, teach, and live with greater intention. This is your Morning Boost.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to your Morning Boost. It happens almost every time. You are 3 days into a new initiative and somebody says, this isn't working. Now, sometimes they might be right, but sometimes it's just Tuesday. I mean, we've introduced a new process and people are learning it. Somebody clicked the wrong button. Something took longer than it expected, or the technology didn't cooperate. I mean, could even just be a step that looked really simple when we designed it, suddenly feels awkward when 50 people are trying to use it all at once. And already somebody is ready to pull the plug. I understand that reaction. When we spend months planning something, we want it to work immediately. We want people to use it correctly. We want the technology to cooperate and everything to feel natural. But one of the hardest lessons I've learned about implementation is this: early implementation problems aren't a verdict, they're evidence. A new system is supposed to expose things that you couldn't see during planning. Real people doing real work will find the awkward steps. They will uncover assumptions that we didn't realize we made. They'll find the technology bugs. They'll discover places where something that looked real simple on paper becomes more complicated in practice. The question isn't whether there will be problems. There will be. The question is, what kind of problem are we looking at? Is it a design problem? Is it a training problem? A technology problem? Or is it simply what happens when people are learning something new? Can we tell the difference?
This segment is sponsored by Grunmeyer Leader Services. Since 2013, GLS has been a trusted partner for school districts across the Midwest, specializing in executive recruitment and leadership support. They believe that great schools start with great leaders, and they are here to help you find the perfect fit for your district. Transform your school's future with the right leader. Visit GrunmeyerLeaderSearch.com to learn more. Grunmeyer Leader Services, transforming education one leader at a time.
A number of years ago, we were implementing a new MTSS system in my school, and the goal behind it was really pretty straightforward. We wanted to become more responsive to student needs. We needed a better way to identify what students needed, to keep track of the supports that we were providing, and honestly, just to make sure that the right people had access to the information they needed to make the right decisions. We also had an opportunity to use a new feature inside of our student information system, and it was one that seemed like it could really help accomplish all of this. On paper, it all made perfect sense. And instead of creating another spreadsheet or another standalone program somewhere else, we could build the work into the student information system that people are already using every day. The information would stay connected to the student. The process could become more consistent. So ultimately, we believed it would help us build a stronger MTSS system. There was just one problem. Actually, there were a lot of little problems. The feature itself was new, the process was new, the people using both of these were new to the entire system, so there was a lot of new all at one time. So we should have been able to predict that it wasn't going to be perfect. People would run into something that didn't work the way that we expected it to. A step took a little longer than we thought it would, or something, I remember something wouldn't display correctly. I mean, we used the process maybe in a way we hadn't anticipated too. So all of this just adds up, and every one of those moments caused this larger frustration. It's understandable. If you're the person doing the work, you're not thinking about the long-term potential of the system. You're just thinking, I need to get this done, and right now this is not making my job any easier, it's making it harder. That's real. And as leaders, we can't dismiss that. One of the worst responses that we can give people during implementation is some version of just trust the process. Because if I'm asking somebody to use a system and they're telling me something isn't working, I need to understand what they're experiencing. But there's another danger on the opposite side of this. We also can't assume that every frustration means that the whole idea is wrong. That's where implementation becomes difficult because the frustration is real, the feedback is very important, and the overall direction can still be exactly right. All three of those things can be true at the exact same time. I think sometimes we struggle with that. In schools, we struggle with this because we're used to evaluating things very quickly. Did the lesson work? Did the meeting work? Did the schedule work? Did the new process work? Yes or no? Implementation, it isn't that clean. Something can be the right system and still have a bad step in it. Something can be the right process and still need adjustment. It can all be very valuable, but still have bugs. And people can believe in the goal, but still be frustrated by how they're trying to accomplish it. These aren't contradictions, they're just normal parts of building something new. So when something went wrong, we started asking a different question. What kind of problem is this? Is this something the technology company needs to fix? Okay. Or did we design part of the process poorly? Or do people simply need more training? Or maybe even is this exactly what learning something new looks like? The answer to all of that mattered because each one of those requires a different leadership response. And the only way that we could answer those questions was by listening to the people actually using the system. The end users here, they become incredibly important. They are finding things that we never would have discovered sitting around a planning table. Well, of course they are. That's what happens when a plan finally meets real life. I can sit in my office and map out a process from beginning to end and think, that looks pretty good. Then a teacher tries to use it while juggling everything else that's happening during the school day, and immediately they will discover something that I never considered. That is not failure of the teacher. That's not failure of me. That's just valuable information about the design. And that's where I think leaders need to make an important shift during implementation. Before the launch, we are designers. After the launch, we become observers. We have to watch what actually happens, not what we hoped would happen, not what the flowchart said should happen, what actually happens when people begin using the system. That's where the real information begins. In our case, in that particular case, we started finding the bugs. Some were small, some were more significant, and there was a few that you could fix real quickly, but the others took some time. And some of the things we saw weren't even really bugs at all. They were just simply parts of a new process that people just needed time to learn. But sorting all of that out, that became the work. The goal isn't to prove that we had selected the right system. The goal is to make sure that the system actually helps us become more responsive to students. That's a very important distinction. Because once leaders invest time and energy into creating something, it becomes very easy to become defensive. This was our idea. I designed it. I believe in this. And then when someone criticized part of it, it's tempting to hear criticism of the decision rather than information about the implementation. That's very dangerous. But the opposite is also just as dangerous. If every complaint immediately causes us to change the system, nobody ever has enough time to actually learn it. Sometimes leadership means adjusting. Sometimes leadership also means staying the course. And knowing which one is needed requires more than reacting to whoever spoke last.
Are you ready to transform your school or classroom? Join hosts Adam and Jim on Control Shift Lead, the monthly podcast on the Forward Ed Network. Every episode, they bring in top educators from across the United States to deliver 3 game-changing insights: something you can control in your work, something that will shift your thinking, and something you can use to lead tomorrow. Don't just manage, lead. Subscribe to Control Shift Lead today.
There's actually some research behind this idea. Implementation science has spent decades studying the difference between choosing a good practice and actually getting that practice to work in the real world. One of the foundational researchers in that field is Dean Fixon. One of the ideas that I find most helpful from his work is that there's a difference between launching something and truly embedding it into an organization. Those aren't the same thing. Sometimes we evaluate a new system as though it has already reached its full potential, when it's really just taking its first steps. We're judging a finished product while we're still building it. And I think that's incredibly important for school leaders to remember because early implementation, it can feel very messy. I mean, people are still learning. We're still establishing routines or refining technology, and everyone is trying to figure out how the pieces all fit together. That's normal. And it brings me back to something I don't think it's talked about enough during implementation, and that is resolve. Now, there's a difference between that and stubbornness. In fact, resolve and stubbornness can look very similar from a distance, but they are not the same thing. Stubbornness says, we're not changing anything. Resolve says, we still believe in what we're trying to do and where we're trying to go, and we're going to keep improving until we get there. That's a very different kind of leadership. With our MTSS system, we believed the direction was right. We needed a better way to respond to student needs. We needed better information. We needed the work connected inside one system instead of depending on separate spreadsheets and emails, people's memories. I mean, all of that part, it hadn't changed. So every time we encountered some frustration, we had something to measure it against. Does this problem tell us the goal is wrong? No. Does it tell us this step needs improvement? Maybe. Okay, then let's improve the step. That's where stakeholder feedback became so valuable. Once a system goes live, the people closest to the work start generating information almost immediately. I mean, the challenge isn't simply collecting complaints, the challenge is collecting useful information. There's a there's a difference between this whole thing is terrible and when I get to this step, I have to enter the same information twice. I mean, that's something that we can solve. Or you'll hear this takes forever. Okay, which part? What were you trying to accomplish and how long did it take? What would have made it easier? The more specific the feedback becomes, the more useful it becomes. And leaders play an important role in helping people move from frustration to information. When something doesn't work, our first reaction usually isn't very specific. Usually it's something like this whole thing is ridiculous. And maybe, or maybe one button is in the wrong place. I mean, we just need to figure it out. And that became part of the work for us. We needed feedback from the people using the system to understand where the actual problems were. Then we faced another leadership challenge. What do we fix first? Because implementation creates another reality. You usually can't fix everything at once, and some problems will stop the work completely, so those have to move to the top of the list. Some create frustration, but they might have some reasonable workarounds. Those also matter because they don't need to come first. And then you're also going to have some that are cosmetic, that maybe only affect a handful of situations. Those might disappear naturally as people become more confident with the new process. If leaders treat every issue as equally urgent, implementation becomes chaotic at best. People never know which version of the process they're supposed to be using because leadership changes it every 3 days. That's not responsiveness, that's instability. And instability creates its own implementation problems. So in our case, we listened, we identified patterns, we prioritized, we made thoughtful adjustments. Then we gave people enough time to actually use the revised process. That's much slower than reacting, but it's also much more effective. I think that lesson applies well beyond technology. Maybe you've redesigned your morning arrival process this year. That first morning, it probably feels chaotic. And that doesn't automatically mean the plan is bad. Just watch. Where's the bottleneck? Is it happening because people are still trying to learn the routine? Or is there a structural problem that will still exist once everybody knows what they're doing? Those require two very different responses. Maybe you've changed your intervention schedule. Teachers confused it the first week. Okay, again, that's information, but what kind of information? Do we need a different schedule or do we simply need a clearer way for people to access that information? That's why I think one of the most important things leaders can do during any implementation is resist the urge to immediately label the result success or failure, or working or not working. Sometimes we just don't know yet. We need enough time to see a pattern. One complaint is information. 10 people encountering the same obstacle? That's a pattern. And patterns deserve our attention. The same question keeps coming up, there may be a clarity problem. If the same step keeps slowing everybody down, there may be a process problem. If the technology repeatedly fails, there might be a product problem. But we don't discover any of that if our only response is to either defend the plan or abandon it. We have to investigate. Every implementation problem isn't a verdict, it's evidence. And evidence needs interpretation. That's the leadership work. As we wrap up today, chances are there's something new being implemented in your school right now. Maybe it's a technology platform, maybe it's a new schedule or an intervention process, or maybe it's simply a different way students move through one part of your building. And somewhere along the way, there's a pretty good chance somebody is going to say, this isn't working. When that happens, I think our job as leaders is to take the statement seriously without automatically accepting the conclusion. Because something did happen, there's information there. Our job is to figure out what kind of information it is. Maybe you've uncovered a flaw that genuinely needs to be fixed. Maybe you've discovered an assumption the planning team never realized they had made. Maybe you've identified exactly where the next adjustment needs to happen. Or maybe you're simply experiencing what every organization experiences when people begin learning something new. Those situations can feel remarkably similar when you're standing in the middle of them. That's why leadership during implementation requires both responsiveness and resolve. We have to be willing to change something we helped create, and we have to be willing to stay the course when the destination is still right, even if the road feels a little bumpy. Neither one is particularly easy, but the goal isn't to protect the plan. The goal is to accomplish the purpose. Our MTSS system wasn't successful because everything worked perfectly on day one, because it didn't. It became successful because we listened, we identified the problems that mattered the most, and we made thoughtful adjustments. And we gave people enough time to become successful with the new system. Maybe that's a better definition of a successful launch. Not one where nothing goes wrong, but one where we learn quickly enough to make the system better, without losing sight of why we built it in the first place. Thank you for spending a few minutes with me this morning. I appreciate everything that you do for your students, your staff, and your communities. Have a great week, Boosters. We'll see you next time on your Morning Boost.
That's your Morning Boost from AWB Education and Media. If this episode helped you reset your thinking or take your next step forward, share it with a colleague. And don't forget to subscribe so your next boost is ready when you need it. Keep showing up with intention. Keep moving forward, and we'll see you next time.